Okay, hey guys, welcome to today's weekly current events and election update stream. I'm Fatma Raja.
And I'm Akash, and today we're going to kind of go through a little bit about the current events and then transition into election 2020. Make sure to follow Fiveable on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. All right, so today we're going to, like I said, talk a little bit more about impeachment and then talk about the word of the year by the Collins Dictionary, which is climate strike. Talk a little bit more about Veterans Day and its significance here in our country, and then end with Fatima talking about the 2020 election updates. All right, so kind of like the first thing to start off is some updates with impeachment. So the whole issue behind the Trump impeachment is, did President Trump pressure Ukraine to investigate a rival, specifically Joe Biden, for political gain? So far, up till this past week, everything has been kind of closed doors. So the public hasn't been getting all the information. Those have mostly been through some released transcripts, tweets, and kind of unofficial information, although we have been getting some information. However, now the real public hearings are going to begin. So all of these hearings that are listed, so with these four people or with these three people, are all going to be in front of the Intelligence Committee. So William Taylor, who's the top American envoy in Ukraine now, George Kent, who is a top State Department official, and Marie Yovanovitch, who was the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine but was removed. A lot of these people have testified behind closed doors already, but they are now going to appear in public hearings, and that will give the public a little bit more understanding on what's actually going on and learning more about their true beliefs instead of just through reading transcripts. Adam Schiff, who's a California Democrat, is kind of leading this investigation, and he's the one that's been pushing the impeachment inquiry. So we'll kind of see through these next few slides a little bit more about the key people that are testifying. And yeah. So one key testifier over the past week was Gordon Sondland. He is the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, and he basically revised his testimony from before. So he had already testified before Congress probably a few weeks ago, but he had not really given all of the information that was expected that he knew. But right now, he just told like the most recent testifying or testimony. He told investigators that he had laid out a deal to Ukraine. This is basically the focus of the entire investigation. And what he said was the deal was that for military aid, the country would have to pledge to begin the investigations that Trump really wanted into Joe Biden. So this is called a quid pro quo, and it contradicts his testimony from last month. So when he testified last month, he didn't really go into a ton of detail about his like involvement in this deal and his involvement in the Ukraine scandal at all. Instead, he kind of glossed over all of these and said that he had no specific information. Everything he knew really was not going to impact the impeachment inquiry. A key thing basically is that he is just a Trump supporter, and he hasn't really shown that he can be unbiased. His because he is the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, that can be expected of some people is that they stay unbiased, but that hasn't really been shown with Gordon Sondland. This is his testimony now is key in the Democrats building their abuse of power case against President Trump. Like I said on the last slide, President Trump's impeachment inquiry all centers around what he had to do with Ukraine in investigating Joe Biden. So it kind of this kind of adds more evidence to the impeachment inquiry that supports the Democrats. However, as we'll see on the next slide, Trump is constantly firing back. So there is one person that we kind of discussed in the a few slides before, Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. Vindman is a decorated army officer, and he provided damaging testimony against Trump about the phone call that's at the center of this entire impeachment inquiry. However, in the past few days, especially the past few days, he's been the target of attacks by Trump and allies. So because he has earned so many military honors, generally people kind of stay away from attacking those that are such well respected and have served for our country. However, he has kind of talked about the conspiracy theories that Vindman has now become involved in. So one of the specific things that I kind of saw a few days ago was that there's supposedly a conversation that's recorded between Vindman and some Russian officers, and they're kind of talking about bashing America and how Americans are uneducated, and they are really talking pro-Obama. So they're kind of obviously opposed to Trump even at that point. These conspiracy theories have now been again retweeted by Donald Trump's son, Trump Jr. And this kind of ties back into AP government. So a lot of why we're doing these current event streams is that a lot of the concepts that we see in current event politics and day-to-day politics all have some sort of connections back to the AP course. So one thing that you'll probably talk about in your AP Gov class, if you're talking about this, or if you're in that class, is sensational news and sound bites. So a lot of times the media has a huge influence on what the public believes and on public opinion. So because the media is looking for more viewers, whether that be CNN, Fox, the morning network shows like Today, Good Morning America, all of them are just, their main goal is just to get more viewers. So they'll basically do anything to get those viewers. So we have what are called sensational news or sensational headlines. So a lot of this news is exaggerated and might not be exactly what the fact is. So kind of looking back over the past few weeks, a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding Alexander Vindman, as well as a lot of other political candidates, have been floated by the media. However, we don't really know the full perspective about why these things happened or why they could happen, because all of these headlines are just short snippets or sound bites is what they're called. They might be 30-second, 1-minute clips that are really just meant to persuade you or make you just think about this situation, but you're probably not going to dive deeper into this. So a lot of these sound bites you'll see on Twitter, on Instagram, on any social media sites these are all just trying to influence you to believe in one way. So if someone sees that, okay, Vindman said that he was going to bash America, they might just look at it and then keep moving on. So kind of the lesson that you learn through the AP Gov class is that the media has a huge influence in what you believe. So you should kind of go further and investigate more than what's presented on the surface level. So just looking at Twitter and getting all your news isn't going to be too trustworthy. So you have to kind of develop a more broad knowledge base in order to understand the current events. All right, so the next slide. This is just going to talk a little bit more about how the actual impeachment inquiry or impeachment process works. So these graphics were on one of our current event streams a few weeks ago, and I kind of wanted to bring them back almost like a month in to talk really about how impeachment works. And again, tying it back to the AP Gov class. So how it starts is any member can introduce a resolution of impeachment. So they can say, they're basically proposing that the president is guilty of a crime. So like the first graphic says, it could be treason, bribery, any other high crime or misdemeanor. After that, all it needs to get through the House of Representatives is a simple majority. So 51%. So one more than half of the House of the Representatives need to vote yes to the impeachment inquiry, and that's when it moves on to the Senate. All right, so in the Senate, that's where the actual trial happened. So a way that I know I remembered it is all of these senators are the ones conducting the trial. So you wouldn't want 435 representatives you wouldn't want that many people influencing what's happening, right? So at the beginning with the House of Representatives, they're the ones that vote on the impeachment inquiry because they're closest to the people. So the House of Representatives is closest to the people. So they're the ones that actually make the motion. After that, with the Senate, since they're a smaller body or only like 100 people, they're the ones that actually conduct the trial. The Chief Justice is the one that presides over that trial, and the senators are the ones that act as a jury. So again, you wouldn't want 435 people on the jury. You want less people. So that 100 group is the one that serves as a jury. And then at the end of the trial, all of the Senate must vote. And here, a simple majority is not enough. You need 67% or 2/3 of the vote to find the president guilty. And if he is guilty, or if they find him guilty, he can be removed from office. And that's when the vice president takes his place. So you kind of see this whole process and how that can unfold. And it's kind of basically repeated on the other graphic, where it's kind of saying the same thing except more in pictures. And then on the next slide, it's a little bit more specific to President Trump. So it's again the same process, and I know those pictures aren't super clear, but first it needs to go out of the House of Representatives with a 51% vote, and then and it needs to be voted on by the Senate, and he needs to be found guilty with 67% of the vote in order for this to actually work and for impeachment to happen. All right, so kind of moving on from this graphic, we're going to talk a little bit more about the climate strike. So if you've kind of just been listening to the news, looking on social media, you probably heard of Greta and all the work she's done with climate change and promoting climate awareness, environmental awareness. So these topics, especially about climate change, global warming, and just the overall human impact on the environment, have all had huge impacts on our society in 2019. So that impact is really so big that Collins Dictionary named climate strike the word of the year. So the way that they defined it, you can read the slide, but it says a form of protest in which people absent themselves from education or work in order to join demonstrations demanding action to counter climate change. So at the beginning of this year, over 1.6 million students walked out of class, and again that happened in September with the United Nations Summit. So it just kind of shows how much one voice can have an impact on the whole world. Greta has kind of been talking about meeting with world leaders. She recently met with Justin Trudeau of Canada, and she's kind of talked a lot about how that her one voice, just like standing outside Parliament in her country, motivated this entire movement. So that's why I really like Collins Word of the Year, even though like you might have never heard of Collins Dictionary or you might have never participated in a climate strike. That is super important because it goes to show that one person's opinion of it, like any magnitude, can have such a big impact on the world. So the last thing that we're kind of going to talk about is Veterans Day. So today, November 11th, is Veterans Day. It's a federal holiday that honors military veterans, and it was previously called Armistice Day. The reason why it's celebrated on November 11th is that basically most of the major hostilities of World War I ended on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, and that was with the Armistice of Germany. Eventually, veterans in the country, I believe in the 1950s, petitioned for the holiday to be renamed Veterans Day, and that's what it's called now. It celebrates the services of all military veterans. So that's kind of a difference from Memorial Day. So Memorial Day, which happens in May, celebrates those that have passed away serving for our country. And then we have Armed Forces Day, which celebrates all the people that are currently in the military. Veterans Day kind of encompasses all of this with all military veterans and people that have served in all branches of the military. Just kind of a little thing to talk about the significance of Veterans Day and just one specific person that caught my attention. So on the top, you can see the Google Doodle that was on Google on their homepage for Veterans Day today. And that was actually a painting. So it was painted by Pete Damon, and he is an Iraq War veteran, and he lost parts of both arms during the conflict. He said that he did go through a lot of hard times after this, especially with like dealing with the trauma that came after it. Of course, he had a disability now with losing parts of both arms. He started painting as a form of therapy, and this specific piece is called Paying Tribute, and it shows a bunch of children, or well, not a bunch of children. It shows two children. One is wearing camo, and then the other is wearing a sailor's cap and a navy blue shirt. It kind of just shows those children putting down American flags. He said he got the inspiration because a lot of places around the country, elementary schoolers are the ones that go out and celebrate this, and they're taught the significance of Veterans Day. So a lot of times these children are depicted in, especially in like a lot of pictures, they're depicted in ways where they're surrounded by American flags, which shows like really the patriotism. And a lot of times they're at graveyards or some other places that symbolize the sacrifices that veterans have made. So that's kind of where he got the inspiration for this. And he put these two young children in this painting, and he was featured by Google for the piece, which is called paying tribute. So just a little reminder about what Veterans Day is. Like a lot of us, we get school off, or we don't really think about the significance of what that is. But definitely, it's something that a lot of people have worked for the freedom of our country, and it's super important to think about and thank all the veterans in your life.
Okay, so on that note, so obviously one of the things that our veterans like work to protect and have worked to protect in the past is our ability to be able to vote. And so and one of the most important elections, if not the one that people consider to be the most important, is the presidential election. So as like the Democrats gear up to nominate someone in 2020 to run on the Democratic ticket, there's the November debate that's coming up. So these debates have been happening pretty much like monthly since like July, I would say. And so the November debate is going to be on November 20th. And so that's in just about 9 days. And as like the months go on, these like standards to qualify for the debate are becoming like higher and higher. The thresholds are getting more difficult, so there's like less and less people actually qualifying. And so that's in an effort for the Democrats to be able to winnow the field enough to have like one candidate that's like a consensus can form behind. Because if it like comes time to like nominate the final candidate for the Democratic ticket and there's still like 4 or 5 people, then it's going to make for a very confusing convention, and it might even cause a contested convention. So for the November debate, like to qualify for it, these candidates needed unique donors, and so they needed 165,000 unique donors like from like over their campaign. And so that's a lot of people, because it means that 165 different people had to like donate to your campaign. And they also had to meet one of 2 different polling thresholds. So they could either get 2 polls at 5% or more in the 4 early nominating states, which are Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, or 4 polls at 3% or more in early nominating states or national surveys. And so a good amount of Democrats still like ended up qualifying, and those Democrats are former Vice President Joe Biden, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg, Senator Kamala Harris, Andrew Yang, who's an entrepreneur and best known for universal basic income, Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Cory Booker, Representative Tulsi Gabbard, who just qualified very recently, and billionaire Tom Steyer. And it's going to be his second time participating in a Democratic debate. So if you want to see all of these people like go head to head on November 20th, make sure you watch just to see like what they're saying and to keep up to date with how their different policy positions are like shifting. And so recently there's another person who is like being talked about as maybe running for the Democratic nomination. So he hasn't officially jumped in, but Michael Bloomberg, who is the co-founder, CEO, and owner of Bloomberg and worth more than $50 billion, there's been talk that he is going to jump into the race. And so he isn't like completely unaware of how like the government works, because he used to be the mayor of New York. And if you recognize his name, yes, it's the same Bloomberg as like the news company Bloomberg. So like maybe you've read an article by them, same guy. And so he recently filed paperwork to put his name on the ballot for the Democratic primary in Alabama. And so like this like filing paperwork thing has been like one of the reasons why people are like, hey, are you gonna run for president? And so he's also planning on filing to be on the ballot for like Arkansas and like a few other states too. So he can like actually be like on the ballot before there's a deadline and he can no longer get on it. So his advisors are saying that he hasn't actually decided whether or not he's going to run, but he just wants the option in case he decides to. And one of the reasons why people are like, it's a really late time to be jumping in the race is because he's potentially skipping a lot of the critical early states like Iowa and New Hampshire. Like Iowa caucuses are pretty much like one of the biggest like events where people get delegates in order to win the Democratic nomination. And if he skips that, then that's potentially going to be to his own like campaign's detriment. But considering the fact that he's worth more than $50 billion, there's also this like idea that he has enough money for that not to be too much of a hindrance to him. But if he does end up joining the race, it means that there's going to be 18 people that are officially in the race for the Democratic nomination. So not all of those people have like officially qualified for the debates, but they're still like technically running. But there's also people who are deciding not to run for another term because there's a few senators that are going to be retiring either at the end of this year or at the end of this term. And so there's 4 different veteran Republican committee chairmen who are retiring. And so that's Senator Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas, Senator Mike Enzi of Wyoming, and Senator Johnny Isakson of Georgia. And so they're all very prominent figures because chairing a committee means that you get to pretty much like direct different legislation, and it gives you a lot of power in the Senate. And Tom Udall, who is a Democrat from New Mexico and a senator, is also retiring at the end of his term. And he is the first Democratic senator to announce his retirement. And the reason why these like retirements are very important is because Democrats need to pick up 4 seats to gain control of the Senate. And so a few streams earlier, we talked about how right now, like during 2020, as you guys know, only 1/3 of Senate seats go up for election each cycle. So during this specific cycle, there's going to be 23 Republicans that are up for re-election, and only like the remaining is like 13, yeah, like 13-ish Democrats that are up for re-election. And so that means that Republicans are going to be like pretty much on the defense to be defending these seats. And for people to be retiring means Republicans no longer have the incumbent advantage in that state. So there's like no name recognition that's like going on behind that specific campaign. And so one of the like of these 4 senators, that Republican senators that are retiring, the one who's like the most at risk of their seat flipping is named Senator Johnny Isakson. And so he's from Georgia, like we learned on the last slide, and he is stepping down at the end of the year for health reasons. So he's not going to be finishing out his term, rather like in December or at the end of December, he's going to be like stepping down. And so that means that the Georgia governor, Brian Kemp, will be appointing a senator to be finishing out his term. And so the way that works is because before the next election comes around, there needs to still be someone that's representing Georgia in the Senate. So the governor is able to appoint someone to be able to fill that role. And so a lot of people have thought that they are qualified enough to be filling this position. And so around 500 people have applied, but the choice is ultimately up to Governor Brian Kemp. And one of the reasons why his like retirement is so significant is because Republican control of the chamber pretty much hinges on 4 seats. And Democrat Stacey Abrams nearly won Georgia's governorship in 2018. And so that means that this could potentially turn Georgia into the Georgia Senate race into a more competitive seat, because when Stacey Abrams like nearly won the Georgia governorship, it meant that Georgia was becoming a more competitive state, right? So it means that like there might not be such a Republican stronghold in the long term. And another reason why this is so critical is because Senator David Perdue, who is also from Georgia, he's up for re-election too. So that means that there are 2 different Senate races happening in Georgia at once. And so this usually like isn't the norm. There's not usually like 2 different Senate seats up in one state. And so it means that first of all, there's no incumbent advantage for whoever ends up running for Johnny Isakson's seat, because they obviously haven't held office before because he's decided to step down. So all of those different factors make Georgia a much more competitive state in terms of the Senate election than it was before he decided to retire. And then there's also stuff that's been happening in terms of the 2019 election. So like Brandon talked about last week, there were a few different races that were going on, and he went into more detail about those. But this week, we're going to be talking about a few different states and their election results. So, election night 2019 was a pretty mixed bag. And if you haven't yet voted in our poll about whether or not you voted last week, make sure to answer that. And so, for the first time in decades, Democrats actually won the state government in Virginia. So, this was a very big thing that happened in terms of like Democrats being able to actually win state elections because there was this thing called Project Red Map where Republicans worked to gain control of a lot of different state governments and small offices. So that has given them like a very um strong advantage when it comes to defending those seats. So for Democrats to be able to like overturn that was something that they saw as like an uphill battle, but they were ultimately successful in that. But it wasn't all good for Democrats because when we look at the Mississippi race, establishment Republican lieutenant governor defeated Tate Reeves, who, oh, actually, establishment Republican lieutenant governor Tate Reeves defeated a moderate attorney general named Jim Hood. And so in Mississippi, the governor is still going to be Republican. And then in Kentucky, Attorney General Andy Beshear seems to have beaten Matt Bevin, who was a Trump endorsed Republican governor who was very unpopular in his state by a very small margin. So, like, when people say that every vote matters, like, it truly does. Like, because as Brendan talked about, like, during last week's stream, there have literally been elections that were decided because they had to like flip a coin because like it was a tie and they just couldn't like figure out what else to do. And so like 5,100 votes is like incredibly small. Like there are high schools in my area that have like more students than that. That might be a slight exaggeration, but you get what I mean. And so in Kentucky, Republicans still won every other statewide office. And so, like, there was no, like, very clear, like, oh, Democrats just, like, swept the entire election or Republicans took all of the seats. It's very much like a mixed bag. Like, there were places where Republicans played better, and there were also places where Democrats ended up playing better. And so, those were the results for the 2019 election. And there were obviously a lot of other like state elections and local elections that happened, but those were like the bigger ones that have been talked about. Okay, so seeing none, hope you guys all have a great night. Bye.
Thank you.